They said every family has its secrets. Ours just hid them in plain sight, beneath the smiles, the dinners, the soft clinks of silverware that always sounded a little too rehearsed. I used to think the studio I built was my escape from all that, my sanctuary, the one place where my voice wasn't drowned out by theirs. But I was wrong. The night my sister replaced me, the night my parents called it a partnership, something inside me cracked like old glass. It wasn't just betrayal. It was revelation. Because that night, for the first time, I saw what my family truly was. Not a home, but a system. Not bound by love, but by quiet transactions and unspoken rules that no one dared to question. It started with whispers in the hallway. My name spoken like a secret, half pity, half judgment. My sister's laughter echoing from inside my studio, where my sketches once lined the walls. The scent of fresh paint still hung in the air, but everything felt wrong. Even the light. It was softer, dimmer, like it knew what had been taken from me. When my parents called me in to talk, they smiled too much. They used words like family, trust, growth, but behind every word was something older, colder, like they were reading from a script they'd inherited long before I was born. I listened as they told me it was time to move forward together, that my sister had a better public image, that maybe I should focus on creative direction instead of leadership. They thought I'd nod. They thought I'd agree, but as they spoke, I realized something horrifying. This wasn't their first betrayal. It was just the first one I was old enough to see. Every decision they ever made, every smile, every "we're proud of you," was part of a quiet conditioning. A legacy of control passed down like blood. And I finally understood why my grandmother never looked anyone in the eye during family dinners. That night, I didn't cry. I just stood in the doorway of my studio, watching my sister perform ownership in a place that once held my dreams. And as I watched, something colder than grief settled in my chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't shock, it was recognition. The next morning I woke before dawn, unable to breathe in that house. The walls felt thinner, like they'd been listening all night. My phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Don't take it personally, it's just business." The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did. I stared at them until the letters blurred. Business. That was the word my parents always hid behind. When they couldn't say betrayal, they said business. When they couldn't say control, they said tradition. I walked to the studio anyway. The key still fit, but it turned slower in the lock, as if the door itself hesitated to let me in. Inside, the air was colder. My desk had been moved, my nameplate gone. Her coffee cup sat where mine used to be. There was a framed photo of my family on the shelf, the same photo that used to be in our hallway, but I wasn't in it anymore. My space, my history erased like it had never belonged to me. That's when I saw the file. A thin folder tucked beneath the cabinet, half hidden under old design drafts. My name was printed on the label, faded, almost rubbed out. Inside were contracts, not new but years old, documents that tied my work, my studio, even my signature back to my parents' company. I realized then that they'd planned this long before my sister ever smiled her first camera smile. I was never the owner, I was the placeholder. The worker who didn't know the job was temporary. As I stood there, a strange calm washed over me. I thought of my grandmother, again. How she used to say, "Every daughter in this family pays her way out." I never understood what she meant until that moment. The women before me had all been written out of their own stories. They built, they gave, they trusted. And when their work began to shine, someone else took the credit. It wasn't a coincidence. It was inheritance. A quiet curse disguised as family tradition. I left the studio without touching anything. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I'd found the edge of a map, and beyond it, the truth my family had buried for generations. That night, I drove to my grandmother's house, even though she'd been gone for almost 3 years. The place hadn't changed. The curtains still drawn, the porch light still flickering like it didn't know whether to die or hold on. The key she'd given me years ago still hung from my keychain. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. When I stepped inside, the smell of lavender and old paper hit me like a memory. It was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that feels aware of you. Her study was exactly as I remembered, stacks of journals tied with ribbons, old photographs, a sewing machine that hadn't worked since I was a child. I went straight to the drawer she used to keep locked, the one she said held family matters. The lock was brittle, it gave way with a small sigh. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written in her careful, trembling script, each one addressed to someone different, but every single one began the same way: "To the daughter who will understand." I read until my eyes burned. The letters weren't love notes, they were warnings. She wrote about being promised things that were later taken, about signing what she didn't read, and smiling while they clipped her wings. She spoke of my grandfather, how he'd convinced her to give up her name on their first business for the good of the family. It was all there, the same pattern generation after generation: women who built, men who owned, daughters who disappeared from the story once the money came in. In the last letter, dated the year she died, she wrote something that chilled me. "It's not the business that's cursed. It's the belief that we owe them." I read that line again and again until the paper started to tremble in my hands. That's when I saw it. A faint drawing on the back of the page. A symbol. I'd seen it before, carved into the frame of the studio door. I'd thought it was just a scratch. Now, I wasn't so sure. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. I didn't know what the symbol meant, but I knew this: my grandmother hadn't just left me her words, she'd left me a map, and if the curse was real, if the pattern was deliberate, then someone was still keeping it alive. I couldn't sleep after finding that symbol. Every time I closed my eyes, it appeared behind my eyelids, carved, deliberate, waiting. The next morning, I spread the letter on my kitchen table, tracing the symbol with my finger. It looked like a circle broken by 3 uneven lines, almost like a family crest that had been erased halfway. I searched my memory for where I'd seen it before: the frame of the studio door, the old invoices from our first client, even the tiny logo embossed on my parents' stationery, hidden beneath the company name. How had I never noticed? It had always been there, quietly claiming everything we touched. I opened my laptop and began digging through old files, tax documents, brand registrations, anything that carried that mark. The more I found, the sicker I felt. The symbol wasn't decorative, it was ownership. Every contract tied to our family business contained a version of it, disguised as part of the legal watermark. My grandmother's letter wasn't just a confession, it was evidence. At some point, I realized my hands were shaking. I wasn't supposed to know this. I wasn't supposed to see it. My parents had made sure every generation of daughters signed under that mark without ever asking what it meant. And those who questioned it, like my grandmother, were quietly pushed aside, labeled emotional, unstable, difficult. I remembered the day my mother called Grandma forgetful for the first time. I was 12. That was the same week my grandmother stopped. Visiting the studio, I found an old photo of the first building they'd ever bought. In the corner of the foundation stone, barely visible, was that same symbol, chiseled in before the paint dried. My stomach turned. This wasn't just paperwork, it was ritual. Every new project, every family venture began with that mark, a seal to remind us who really owned what. I wondered how many times I'd signed my name beside it, smiling, thinking it was just design. By sunset, the letter on my table looked older, heavier, as if it knew I was finally reading it right. My grandmother hadn't left me a story. She'd left me a warning encoded in her handwriting, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. Because I realized something that made the air around me shift. If a symbol can bind generations, maybe breaking it could free them. I drove to my parents' house at dusk, the hour when everything looks softer but nothing feels safe. The sky was the color of fading bruises, and the streetlights flickered like they were warning me to turn back. I didn't. My mother opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting. She smiled, that careful kind of smile people wear when they already know why you've come. My father sat in the living room, papers spread across the table, contracts, ledgers, the familiar trail of family business. My sister was there too, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice me. I placed the letter on the table. My grandmother's words stared up at us like a ghost that refused her worst. That refused to stay buried. Said that word. You used her work, I said quietly. Mine. You used all of us. My father didn't look up. You don't understand, he said. This is how families survive. His voice was calm, almost kind, and that made it worse. My mother reached for my hand, her eyes full of practiced sadness. Sweetheart, your grandmother didn't see the bigger picture. Neither do you. I unfolded the paper and pointed to the symbol. Then explain this. That air shifted. For a moment, no one spoke. No one spoke. My father's jaw tightened. My sister finally looked up, her expression unreadable. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the letter, not to read it, but to take it away. That mark, she said softly, has been with us for generations. It's not something you can just erase. I stared at her. Then what is it? She hesitated, eyes flicking toward my father. A protection, he said. A promise that what we build stays within the bloodline. His words sounded rehearsed, ancient, like something passed down without question. But something didn't fit. If it was meant to protect the family, why did it always silence the daughters? Why were the women the ones who disappeared from the paperwork, from the credits, from the story? I looked at my sister. You signed something too, didn't you? She froze. A flicker of guilt crossed her face before she turned away. That was all the confirmation I needed. The system wasn't just alive, it was thriving, feeding on loyalty and silence. My parents weren't monsters, they were believers. And belief, I realized, was harder to fight than evil. As I walked out, my mother's voice followed me, soft and broken. Don't dig too deep, or you'll end up like her. She meant Grandma, but I didn't answer, because deep down I already had. I left their house with the letter folded in my pocket and their words echoing in my head. A protection, a promise. Those phrases clung to me like smoke. I didn't go home right away. I drove without direction, the city slipping past in blurs of orange light and wet asphalt. Somewhere between exhaustion and obsession, I pulled into an old public library, the kind that still smelled of dust and glue. It was nearly empty, just a security light buzzing in the corner. I needed silence to think, but silence only made the symbol louder in my mind. I started with local archives, business registrations, land deeds, old newspapers. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw it AG. Iane. A grainy photograph of a ribbon cutting from the 1950s. Different people, different name, but the same broken circle carved into the stone behind them. A chill ran through me. I searched more. The deeper I went, the more it appeared. Companies, charities, even schools, each founded by families who seemed unconnected on paper. But there it was, hidden like a watermark on every success story. Our mark. I filled pages of notes, drawing lines between names and dates until the pattern became undeniable. These families married into each other. They shared boards, fundraisers, donations. My grandmother hadn't stumbled into some unlucky arrangement. She'd been born into an invisible network that traded power under the guise of legacy. They called it protection, but it looked more like control disguised as tradition. Every generation added new faces, new lies to keep it breathing. Sometime after midnight, I found an article about a partnership that collapsed decades ago. The headline read, "Family Dispute Leads to Silent Dissolution." In the photo was a young woman who looked unsettlingly like my grandmother, standing apart from the group, her face half turned as if she already knew she would be erased. The caption named her Eleanor Gray. My grandmother's middle name was Gray. The symbol sat etched behind her on the wall. I leaned back, heart racing, realizing the truth that made the room feel smaller. This wasn't a family mark. It was a signature of ownership passed between the same few bloodlines for generations. My family wasn't protecting anything. We were property, each of us bound to a promise made long before we were born. I didn't sleep that night. My laptop screen glowed like an open wound in the dark, the names and dates swimming before my eyes. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph of Eleanor Gray, my grandmother before she became the quiet ghost my family pretended not to remember. In the margins of that article, one name kept repeating, Dr. Samuel Mercer, consultant, advisor, family associate. He appeared beside every one of those founding families, like a shadow that didn't belong to any of them. I searched deeper. Mercer wasn't just a consultant. He'd been a legal intermediary, someone who handled estate transfers, partnerships, and silent dissolutions. Then, in 1987, he vanished. No obituary, no trace. Just a line in a court record, case dismissed due to disappearance of key witness. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. Instead, I found a single note left on an old genealogy forum from 15 years ago. A username, E.Gray I Descendant, had written, Mercer tried to warn us. He said the mark wasn't a signature. It was a seal, a seal. That word stuck in my throat like glass. If that was true, it meant every contract sealed with it wasn't just legal, it was binding in ways that went beyond paper. Maybe that's why my grandmother wrote those letters. Maybe she'd met Mercer before he vanished. The next morning, I called every number I could find tied to his old firm. Most were disconnected. Finally, one line picked up. A woman's voice, sharp but tired. "Mercer Legal Archives," she said. I hesitated, then told her my name. There was a pause long enough to make me think she'd hung up. Then quietly she said, "You shouldn't have found this." Her voice trembled when I asked if she knew the symbol. She sighed, like someone remembering a promise they regretted keeping. "He called it the covenant mark. Said it was older than the families who use it now. Said once your blood signs under it, it remembers you." Before I could ask anything else, she whispered, "He left something behind, but if you want it, don't come alone." Then she hung up. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I didn't know what frightened me more, that someone still guarded Mercer's secrets, or that they already knew my name. I went the next morning before I could change my mind. The address, the WUM Anne had confirmed in a quick online record, sat at the edge of the old industrial district, an area mostly reclaimed by rust and weeds. The building was 2 stories of crumbling brick with a faded sign that still read Mercer Gray Legal Associates. The gray made my stomach twist. My grandmother's name again. Inside, the air was heavy with paper dust and the faint smell of burnt wiring. Most of the office was stripped bare, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, but in one corner, a single filing cabinet stood upright, its top drawer slightly open like someone had left in a hurry. I pulled it open. Folders had been cut in half, some names blacked out with thick marker, but at the back was a sealed envelope, brittle with age. The handwriting on it stopped me cold, Eleanor Gray. Confidential. I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs. Grainy, black and white shots of the same families I'd seen in the archives, gathered around tables, signing documents. In each image, the same symbol appeared somewhere, etched into the wood, burned into wax, sewn into the lining of a coat. At the bottom of the stack lay a letter written in Mercer's precise, slanted hand. He wrote about the Covenant families, about a pact made a century ago to preserve influence through shared lineage and silent ownership. He described the mark not as a logo, but as an identifier, a sigil that recorded every signature bound beneath it. Those who sign, he wrote, offer their name to the ledger, and the ledger remembers. At the end, he'd scrawled a warning. The mark cannot be removed by fire or ink, only by truth. I folded the letter back into its envelope just as a floorboard creaked behind me. My breath caught. A shadow moved in the doorway, a tall man in a gray maintenance uniform watching me. "This place is closed," he said flatly. But his eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand. Recognition flashed there, followed by something else, fear. I wanted to ask who he was, but he just shook his head. "If you found that, you're already in it," he said quietly. "Leave it alone before it starts looking back." Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall until only silence remained. I stood frozen, Mercer's words burning through my mind only by truth. Whatever that meant, it wasn't just metaphor. The mark had survived a century. And if what Mercer hinted at was real, it might not be finished writing our names yet. I drove home with Mercer's letter on the passenger seat, trying not to look at it, but it felt alive beside me, like it was waiting to be read again. "The ledger remembers." The phrase repeated in my mind, heavy and relentless. I didn't understand how paper could remember, but after what I'd seen, I wasn't sure it was just paper anymore. When I got home, I spread everything across the floor. My grandmother's letters, the photos, Mercer's envelope. Together they looked like a map made of secrets. I started circling every mention of the word ledger, until I noticed something strange. The same initials kept appearing beside it. HGL, my grandmother had written them once in the margin of her last note, followed by the words, "Kept safe beneath the house." At first, I thought she meant her own house, the one that had sat empty since she died. But there was another possibility. The family house, the old estate my parents kept locked since the business moved into the city. The one they never let me visit alone. My hands trembled as I searched through my grandmother's documents again. On the back of a faded deed, scrawled in pencil, were coordinates and 3 words. Ledger, basement, light. It didn't make sense, but I knew what I had to do. I drove there just after midnight, The estate sat under a sky full of motionless clouds, the windows dark, the air thick with that hollow quiet that comes before a storm. The back door still opened with the same key I'd stolen years ago. Inside, everything smelled like dust and lemon polish, untouched. As if time itself had agreed not to move here. The basement door was behind the kitchen. I'd never been allowed to open it as a child. Storage, they used to say. The lock was new, gleaming against the old wood. I pried it open with the edge of a screwdriver. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, and the air grew colder the deeper I went. At the bottom, a single light bulb swayed on a wire. Beneath it sat a wooden chest, carved with the same broken circle symbol. My heart stopped. On the lid, burned into the surface, were the same initials, HGL. I reached out, my fingers brushing the wood. The moment I touched it, the bulb above me flickered once, then went out. For a long moment I just stood there, blind in the dark. The air was thick and still, tasting faintly of metal. Somewhere above me the house creaked, a slow, living sound. I found my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dust, landing on the chest. The carvings were deeper than I'd thought. Each line of the broken circle burned black, as if the wood had resisted and lost. I knelt down and traced the initials with my thumb. HGL. Whatever it stood for, it wasn't random. The lock was old, heavy brass, but it snapped after a few hits with the handle of a wrench. Inside wasn't gold or papers or anything I expected. It was filled with books, not printed ones, but bound ledgers with uneven pages, their covers hand-stitched with thread the color of dried blood. There were at least 7, each labeled with a year. I lifted the first one, 1904. The pages were filled with lists, names, signatures. Some had notes beside them, acquired, transferred, dissolved. Others had only a single symbol drawn next to them, the broken circle, smaller, sharper. The next book was the same, and the next, right up to the most recent one, dated 2019. My name was there, written in perfect ink, the date of the studio's founding printed beside it. Next to my name, reassigned to secondary heir, my sister. For a second I couldn't move. The room seemed to tilt. I could hear my heartbeat echoing off the stone walls. These weren't just records. They were ownership transfers. Lives reduced to transactions. The ledger really did remember. Each generation's deals and betrayals, all preserved like holy scripture. At the very back of the final book was a single loose page. It wasn't old like the rest. The paper was crisp, new. Across the top, one sentence. The line ends when the ledger burns. Below it, in a handwriting I recognized instantly, were the initials E.G., my grandmother. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming for a heartbeat. And in that dimness, I could have sworn I saw something move. Not a person, but the faint outline of another hand resting on the open book, right beside mine. When the light steadied again, the space was empty, but a single page had turned on its own. The new page carried only 2 words, next heir, and beneath it, an empty line waiting for my name. I backed away from the chest, the light trembling in my hand. The page shouldn't have turned. There was no wind, no draft, no movement. Yet it shifted, deliberate and slow, like something waiting to be seen. Next heir. The words stared back at me, patient and final. The ink on the line where my name should be wasn't dry. It was wet, glistening under the light, as if it were ready. I whispered, "No," before I even realized I'd spoken. My voice sounded too small for the silence that followed. I closed the book and shoved it back into the chest, slamming the lid shut so hard dust fell from the ceiling. For a second, I thought I heard something breathe behind me. Just one shallow exhale. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just the walls, the shadows, and the echo of my own pulse. I dragged the chest toward the stairs, meaning to take it with me, but it wouldn't budge past a certain point. Like the wood had sunk roots into the floor. Every attempt made the air heavier, pressing on my chest until I had to stop. I gave up and grabbed only the loose page, the one with my grandmother's writing. The moment I pulled it free, the bulb above me flickered back on, burning so bright it hurt to look at. That's when I saw it, burned into the cement wall beside the chest. The same broken circle, larger this time, almost perfect except for one faint gap at the top. And inside it, written in smaller marks, were words I hadn't noticed before, bound by inheritance, freed by flame. My grandmother's note had said, The line ends when the ledger burns. Now the message on the wall finished the thought. When I finally climbed the stairs, I could hear something faint below me. A sound like the turning of pages. Slow, steady, rhythmic. I told myself it was just the air moving, just the sound of old paper settling. But when I looked back one last time, I saw the light bulb swinging again. And the chest was open. I locked the basement door behind me, stuffed the page into my coat pocket, and drove home without turning on the radio. I didn't want to hear anything else that could be mistaken for whispering. But that night, as I lay awake, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The page I'd taken, the one that had my grandmother's initials, now had a faint red fingerprint beside her name. And it wasn't hers, it was mine. The next morning, everything felt off, even before I opened my eyes. You know that moment between dreaming and waking, when the world feels wrong but you can't explain why? It was like that, but it didn't fade when I sat up. My phone was buzzing with messages from the studio. My sister had posted a new announcement on the company page: family partnership relaunch, a legacy reborn. My name wasn't mentioned anywhere. At first, I thought it was just a cruel joke, but when I opened the comments, I saw faces I recognized. Old clients, journalists, even my parents. Everyone was congratulating her. And then I saw it. The new company logo. The same broken circle. My blood went cold. I didn't tell anyone about that symbol. No one had seen it but me. It couldn't be coincidence. I went to the studio immediately. The whole place felt rearranged. Not redesigned, just subtly wrong. My office door had a new nameplate, Claire. Founder DUH Creative Director. My sister's name, my old title. And the wall behind the reception desk had that same circle, embossed in gold, as if it had been there forever. When she walked out to greet me, she looked different. Taller somehow, calmer, like she'd rehearsed this moment. "You got the message," she said softly, as if we'd planned it together. I wanted to scream, to ask her what she'd done, but something in her eyes stopped me. They weren't cold or cruel, they were absent. "I didn't sign anything," I told her. My voice shook. "This isn't yours." She tilted her head slightly, the way my mother used to when she was pretending not to be angry. "Of course it is," she said. "It's always been ours. You just kept holding the wrong end of the deal." The word deal hit me like a punch. She knew. She didn't even have to say it. She knew. When I left the studio, I saw something carved into the wooden frame of the front door. It hadn't been there yesterday. I ran my fingers over the grooves. The letters were fresh, almost damp. HGL. That night, when I looked at the page I'd taken from the ledger, it had changed again. The faint fingerprint had spread into a smudge, and beneath it, where my grandmother's initials had been, there was a new line of writing, smaller, shakier, like someone writing from far away. Inheritance accepted. I didn't call first. I just drove to my parents' house, if you can even call it that. Estate feels more accurate, the kind of house built to make you feel small, even when you're family. The same one that held the basement I'd broken into. When my mother opened the door, she looked surprised, but not in the way you'd expect. It was more like she'd been expecting someone else. "Darling," she said, smiling too easily, "you should have told us you were coming." I didn't answer. I walked straight past her into the sitting room. My father was there, reading the financial section like always. He didn't look up when I spoke. "What did you do?" He turned a page. "You'll have to be more specific." "The studio," I said. "The partnership, the symbol, all of it. What did you do?" Now he looked up. Slowly, calmly. His eyes had the kind of patience you only see in men who think time is theirs to command. "You found the ledger," he said. It wasn't a question. My mother's hand tightened around her teacup. Porcelain clicked against porcelain. I felt something shift in the air like a current between us. "How long have you known?" I demanded. He folded the newspaper, laid it on the table, and said, "Since before you were born. It's not something we learn, it's something we inherit." My stomach dropped. I pulled the folded page from my coat pocket and tossed it onto the table. The faint red smudge gleamed under the chandelier light. "Then explain this." My mother finally spoke, her voice almost tender. "That's how it begins," she said softly. "The ledger chooses who carries it next. It always has." I stared at her. "You make it sound like it's alive." My father's lips curved, just slightly. "Alive isn't the right word. The ledger is continuity. It remembers balance. It restores what's owed." The families who honor it prosper. The ones who don't. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. You mean Grandma, I whispered. She refused. She tried to burn it, my mother said. That's why it chose you. Blood always corrects its own line. I wanted to scream that they were insane, that they were talking about a book like it had a pulse. But then my father reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out something small and blackened. He set it gently on the table, a charred piece of leather, the corner of a ledger. My grandmother had tried and failed, and failed. When I looked up again, my mother was watching me, her voice barely above a whisper. The sooner you stop fighting it, she said, the less it takes from you. I didn't remember leaving their house. One moment I was staring at that burned scrap of leather on the table, the next I was standing outside in the driveway, my breath fogging in the night air. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I don't even remember driving home. All I know is that when I walked into my apartment, something already felt wrong. It was the paintings first. I'm a designer, an artist. I've spent years shaping light and form, but that night, every canvas in the room looked different. The colors seemed to shift when I looked too long. The shadows stretched deeper than the paint should allow. One piece, my favorite, the first I ever sold, now had a faint, circular burn mark near the edge. A broken ring. I tried to wash it off. I used water, solvent, even sandpaper. But the more I scrubbed, the clearer it became. Like the mark wanted to be seen. By the time I stopped, my hands were raw and bleeding, and the mark looked almost carved through the paint, as if it had been there from the start. That's when I heard the sound. At first, it was faint, the soft rustle of turning pages. It was coming from my studio. The door was slightly open, though I was sure I'd locked it. I stepped closer, every breath measured, shallow. Inside, the air felt heavier, thicker. My sketchbook was lying open on the desk, flipping pages slowly, one after another, though there was no wind. The last page stopped on its own. A new drawing. One I hadn't made. It was a perfect rendering of my grandmother, younger, sharper, standing in front of a burning house. In her hands she held something small and square, the ledger. Behind her, carved into the smoke, was that same broken circle, and underneath the drawing, in my own handwriting, were the words, "She failed. Don't repeat it." I dropped the book. My phone buzzed just then, breaking the silence. A message from an unknown number, only one sentence. The ledger doesn't wait. I deleted it instantly, but it didn't matter. The words were already burned into my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were full of whispers, voices I half recognized. My grandmother, my mother, and somewhere beneath them, something deeper, older, whispering my name again and again, like it was learning how to say it right. When I woke up, my hands were covered in black dust, like soot, and on the floor beside my bed lay the page from the ledger. It was blank now, except for 3 new words scrawled at the bottom. Payment in progress. The first time it happened, I thought I'd just forgotten, a lapse, a skipped beat in the rhythm of the day. But then the gaps started growing. I'd wake up in places I didn't remember driving to. My sketchbook would have new pages filled with drawings I couldn't recall making. Every one of them showed the same thing, the ledger, open, waiting. At first I tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, maybe something I'd picked up from the years of overwork. But the more I tried to explain it, the more reality seemed to resist. Time started folding in on itself. I'd check the clock. 2:43 p.m. blink. Suddenly, 6:15. My phone log showed calls I never made sent to my sister, and every voicemail from her began the same way. "Hey, just wanted to check in. You sound closer, closer." That word haunted me. I tried talking to my assistant Maya, the only person I still trusted, but when I told her about the missing hours, she gave me a look I didn't recognize. Fear, maybe pity. Then she said something that made my stomach twist. "You already told me all this yesterday. You said it stopped." I didn't remember that conversation. Later that night, I checked my security cameras, the ones I'd installed after finding that first symbol at the studio. There was footage of me working at 3 a.m., head bent over the desk. But what froze me wasn't that I didn't remember doing it. It was that, in the reflection of the studio window, there were 2 of me, one sketching, one standing behind, watching. When I slowed the footage down, frame by frame, I noticed something else. The me in the reflection moved first. The me at the desk followed, like the mirror wasn't copying me. but controlling me. I don't know how long I stared at that screen before I heard the faint sound again. Paper rustling, like someone turning pages just out of sight. I turned around and my lights flickered once. When they came back, there was a faint smell of burnt paper. On the wall, written in charcoal dust, was a message I hadn't seen before. Every heir forgets something. I didn't understand what it meant until I opened my phone the next morning and saw that my oldest folder, the one with all my original artwork, was gone. Not deleted, just never existed. And in its place, there was a new folder, untitled, inside one file, a photo of me standing in front of the family estate. But here's the thing. I don't remember ever going back. I must have stared at that photo for an hour. Every detail looked real, the damp gray sky, the cracked gravel of the driveway, the ivy climbing the stone walls. But what stopped me cold was the timestamp. It was from the previous night, 2:43 a.m. That exact minute I remembered blinking at my apartment clock before the time jumped forward. In the photo, I'm standing at the entrance to the old family estate. My head is slightly tilted, my eyes half open, like I'm sleepwalking. My right hand is holding something small and dark, the corner of a ledger. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, but the symbol was unmistakable. The broken circle burned into the cover. For a moment I thought it was a trick, some kind of AI edit, a glitch, anything. I even ran metadata checks, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. But every trace said otherwise. The GPS tag matched the estate perfectly. The image wasn't created or manipulated. It was taken by me. I drove there before I could talk myself out of it. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, like the road itself was pressing against me. The gates were already open when I arrived, swinging slightly in the wind. My headlight swept across the stone lions that guarded the path. For a moment, I thought one of them turned its head. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Every surface gleamed, polished, untouched, like no one had lived there for years. But I could smell something faintly burnt. Eated memory. When I opened my eyes again, the house was quiet. The air smelled of smoke. The portraits were blank, the mirrors cracked. The ledger was gone, but my hands were covered in soot. In the distance, I heard sirens, faint, growing closer. I looked down and saw a matchbox near my feet, my grandmother's initials carved into the side. And for the first time, I understood what she meant by freed by flame. I struck the match. The wood hissed to life, trembling between my fingers. I whispered her name, Eleanor Gray, and dropped it. The fire caught instantly, running along the floor like veins of light, devouring everything it touched. The air burned, the walls screamed, and for a moment I thought I heard her laugh. Not cruel, not frightened, but free. As the flames reached the ceiling, I felt nothing but peace. The ledger could remember no more. They said the fire was an accident, faulty wiring, maybe an old fuse sparking in the walls. The estate burned through the night, leaving nothing but a blackened shell of stone and ash. They never found the ledger. They never found me, either. Not completely. The official report said, no remains identified, but my sister swore she saw someone walking away from the flames just before the roof collapsed. A woman in a long coat, covered in soot, holding what looked like a book. I've seen the photo she took, the image too grainy to prove anything, but when I look closely, I can almost see my grandmother's silhouette inside the smoke. Or maybe it's mine. Sometimes I think the fire didn't destroy the ledger at all. Maybe it just moved. I keep catching glimpses of it. In reflections, in the corners of photographs, in the golden logo that mysteriously reappeared on my sister's new studio wall. It watches, it waits, it remembers. And every so often, when I paint late into the night, the scent of burnt paper drifts through the room. I tell myself it's nothing, that I'm free. But when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound, soft and patient, pages turning, one after another. The ledger remembers.